Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. To Dr. Nafisa Ilham. I'm Sitina Farhan Eniba binti Nozula, D2021097892. I'm going to present about comparison between deductive methodology and inductive methodology. So, deductive. Deductive is a teaching approach that starts from one of several formulas, principles, laws, theories, and rules followed by its application to specific example. To obtain new conclusion or generalization of known formula, principle, law, or theories, and the deductive method is a complex method. A deductive is valid if it is impossible for the conclusion to be false and its premise are true. For example, premise 1. Puppies is high IQ are intelligent. Premise 2. Asif has a high IQ. Conclusion, Asif is intelligent. For deductive, its approach starts with a reason or example and leads toward generalization. Involves a process of high consideration because it involves the activity of collecting and interpreting information, generalization, and conclusion. In inductive reasoning, the inductive conclusion is an inferential jump beyond the evidence presented, while one conclusion explains the fact, and other conclusion can explain the fact too. It can be that none of the conclusion advanced correctly explain the fact. So, the comparison between deductive and inductive methodology. For deductive, the deductive is a process by which we test whether the hypothesis is capable of explaining the fact or not, and the process by which we arrive at the reasoned conclusion by logical generalization of a non-fact. It is a form of inferences that purport to be conclusive. The conclusion must necessarily follow from the reason given. For deductive to be correct, it must be both true and valid. The premise, reason, given for the conclusion must agree with the real world or be true. The premise must be arranged in a form such that the conclusion must necessarily follow from the premise. Conclusion is derived by generalization from fact. For inductive, induction occurred when we observe a fact and ask why it is. For inductive, the process where we observe certain phenomena and this basis arrive at the conclusion, and different from the deductive because the process are arrived at a reasoned conclusion by logical generalization of known of a fact. In deduction, we logically establish a general proposition based on observed fact. There is no strength of relationship between reason and conclusion in induction. To induce is to draw a conclusion from one or more particular fact or pieces of evidence. The conclusion support the fact and the fact support the conclusion. Researcher observes a phenomenon and then makes a conclusion. Combining inductions and deductions. Double movement of reflective through John Dewey is a process in which inductions and deduction is used in research in a sequential manner. Induction occurs when we observe a fact and ask, why is this? We advance a tentative explanation hypothesis to answer the question. But the deductive is a process by which we test whether the hypothesis is capable of explaining the fact. And there is an example given. In a conclusion, the deductive method is a method of thinking from the general to the specific. This method has certainty in its conclusion where its premise is true and the conclusion must be true. The deductive method is called deduction. The premise and the conclusion of deductive logic must either be both true or both false. Next, in the deductive method, the researcher will start his study with a theory to explain an observation. With that, the researcher will collect data about the case and use the theory to explain the data obtained. After the data is collected, the finding of the study will be generalized to a large population. And for the inductive method, is a method from the specific to the general, which is started by involving the activities of collecting and interpreting information and then drawing conclusion. In other words, accountant must collect, think, study, identify and interpret accounting concept, and then draw conclusion through observation and accounting information obtained into the company accounting system. This inductive method, even if the premise is true, the conclusion is not necessarily be true.